Welcome, everyone, and thanks for being with me this next hour. You're listening to Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks on Transcendental Tuesdays. So if you're listening live, this is October 28th, 2025, and we are broadcasting on 12radio.com and also simulcasting on YouTube channel Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks. So thanks for being here. We're going to have a great show, I think. We'll have a good time together. If you want to join me over in the chat on YouTube, please do that. I try to keep an eye on that during the show. And so if I can answer questions or make a comment, I will, just depending on how wrapped up I get. I just get crazy with this astrology. But thank you for coming. And I see people are already coming in. Hello, Leslie Ross. Thank you so much for coming and, being here today. So on today's show, are you ready to shift gears? I know I am, although it's a little premature, but we've been under the heavy influence of introspective Scorpio, that water sign that's very deep and intuitive and probing. We have 3 planets sitting there. That includes the Sun and Mars and Mercury. And of course, this is the time of year. Those of you who follow astrology a little bit or a lot, you know that the Sun continually cycles all year through each and every sign. It spends 30 days in each of the signs and then it moves on. Well, Mercury and Venus, which are the 2 planets that astronomically are the closest to the sun. They're almost always hanging out somewhere. They're either like in the sign before the sun or the sign after the sun, or they'll be in the sign where the sun is. So that's not unusual to have 2 or 3 planets hanging out together. Now, in this combination, though, Mars is the one that is a little unusual because Mars is in its own orbit, obviously, but it's farther out from the sun. It takes 2.5 years to make that orbit. And so it is not necessarily in the same sign as the sun, but it does happen to be right now until they tend to get far enough apart. Because there again, Mars, it'll spend about 6 weeks in a sign. So to have Mars hanging out with the sun and Mercury, that's a pretty important thing. Mars, that planet of action and inspiration and motivation. So the sun and Mars, they're still in Scorpio. They're going to stay there. I think Mars is actually going to move next week, though. Yep, Mars is going to move into Sagittarius next week. So we're not going to go there yet. But when I say, are you ready to move on? What is happening is that Mercury is going to be the first to move into the next sign, which is going to be Sagittarius, and Mercury is going to move tomorrow. That's Wednesday, October 29th. Now, of course, Mercury is that fast, speedy little planet. Sometimes he'll go through a sign like in 14, 15 days sometimes, or sometimes 21 days, or sometimes much longer when he goes into a retrograde pattern, which of course is what we're going to have coming up in November. But tomorrow we do have Mercury moving into Sagittarius. So I think it's time to start talking about the next sign, talking about Sagittarius. And before we do that, though, I always like to make a plug for Mark's Power Peak, which is that online newsletter that you can get for free. You can subscribe to Mark's Power Peak at 12listen.com. That's 12, the numbers, listen.com. Just find the link and it'll say Mark's Power Peak. And I encourage you to subscribe to that for a couple of reasons. One, because I read an article there that's called The Week Ahead, and it's a lot of what we talk about on this show. So if you're saying, hey, when are those planets moving? Where's the moon? What's going on today? You're going to get my take of what's happening, astrologically speaking, by reading The Week Ahead. And Even though I write it, I'll tell you, I often open that up on my phone and check it out. Like, okay, what was I saying today? What was going on today? And so it just kind of is a way to ground myself in whatever the energy is, especially if I'm not at home and I'm not looking right at my astrology calendar. But you may like that just to get a heads up of what's going on for that particular day and for that particular week. But also there's a number of articles there. So if you're of that mindset that you want to know about metaphysics or mysticism, spirituality, numerology, feng shui, I Ching, tarot, there's a number of articles every single week in that newsletter. And like I said, it's free. You don't have to pay anything. You just need to subscribe, and you don't have to worry about your, information getting spread all over the universe, literally. Nope, you're just going to get access to Mark's Power Peak. So go ahead and check that out if you'd like to. And of course, subscribe to this particular YouTube channel, C.A. Brooks, or Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks, if you'd like to do that. And, I hope, this is relatively new to me, at least in the last, 4 months or so. And I hope to grow it over time, maybe with some shorts and some other information that you can just come and kind of get, a little dose of some kind of encouragement or knowing where the planets are or whatever you're interested in. So if you'd like to subscribe, please do that. And now the announcements are over. Let's start talking about what's going on in the cosmic dance, because that's truly what it is. These planets going back and forth and twirling together and having relationships together. That's how, to me, it makes sense to talk about astrology, even though, of course, these planets are not persons, and they also do not make us do anything. But I talk that way sometimes, but just keep in mind, they don't. They just represent mass consciousness. And oftentimes they represent our consciousness. And there again, if you've got your own natal chart, if you know where all those planets were located, literally around the planet Earth, at the time you were born, there's just so much information. I want to say oodles of information that you can derive from that to at least think about it. You don't have to buy every single thing. And of course, for every astrologer, there's a different way of interpreting those planets and those signs and those relationships, those aspects between the planets. But, I'll tell you, it's really helpful. It's really helpful to me sometimes to just understand, CA, what are you thinking? Or what's going on here? And then I go look at my chart and I look at Mercury and I see some of the planets that are influencing it. And I go, okay, there you go. Now I don't have to continue in that mindset, but it just gives me a little something to think about. And that's all astrology really is a lens through which we can understand or see our world. Now, I'm not sure we'll ever understand it, but we all need some kind of lens. We need some kind of way that we're looking at our lives. And that's one of the ones that I use because, quite frankly, it's one of the most fun. It's a good time. It's not only insightful, but I think it's really fun. And why not have some fun while you're living, right? All right, so let's start looking at Sagittarius. This is the 9th sign of the zodiac, and we're going to look at it, though, through the mind of Mercury, even though I'm going to throw out a lot of information. And you might say, and this is something that's a little, it's nuanced. What's the difference between the sun in Sagittarius and Mercury in Sagittarius? Or what is it like if it was Saturn in Sagittarius? Well, the way I look at it is that, and here again, some of the distinctions may or may not be clear, and maybe they don't need to be. Sometimes we want, myself included, we just want to be so exact. And maybe that's not important. So when we look at these various signs, the way I see it is the planets are almost like characters or actors on a stage. They each have their role to play. So the sun represents ego. The moon represents emotional expression, not your feelings per se, but how you express them, how you show them to other people. Mercury, the way you think, the way you communicate, the way you connect dots. And so on. Venus, represents, what we find attractive. So each of these characters, they have their basic pattern, or they have their basic, what part are they playing? Mars is the actor. He wants action. He wants inspiration. He wants to be the motivator. He wants to be the influencer, right? But they are different depending on their wardrobe. So that's how I see the signs. Literally, the director says, okay, Mercury, go to Sagittarius and get dressed. So Sagittarius is the wardrobe. It's kind of the mode through which now Mercury is going to be that speaker, that communicator, that messenger. And so if that helps, use that kind of analogy, or maybe you'll come up with one of your own that feels even better. But that's how I see it. And there again, I don't think that you have to, even though I will sometimes say, okay, there's Mercury and Sagittarius, somebody else might go, no, I think that's more that, Mars and Sagittarius person speaking. But it doesn't matter. This is for fun. Remember that. This is fun. So don't take it too seriously. Just take it in and take in whatever you can use. So we're going to talk about Sagittarius today, and maybe you're a Sun Sagittarius, or maybe you have another planet in Sagittarius. But remember too, while Mercury is going through this particular sign, we're going to have some of these things going on, or we're going to notice manifestations of Sagittarius energy. So let's get started. Now, I just want to say too, I know that many of us can appreciate Mercury in mysterious Scorpio. So I don't want to do disservice to Scorpio. It's the one that gives us, what spelunking is? It's, exploring caves. So that's what Scorpio does. It goes underneath into the unconscious mind or the subconscious, and it's searching. It's searching for hidden gems and treasures that lead to personal insights and revelations. And once again, we still have a lot of that energy out there in the cosmos with Sun and Mars. However, it always feels to me that when we kind of start emerging from Scorpio, it feels good. Even though I love diving down, I love getting those insights. It's just kind of like a breath of fresh air. When Mercury or any other planet, all of a sudden, to me, it feels like they're coming back to the surface and they're shaking off like a dog, that's been in the water. And it's fire. It's a spark of fire. It's a spark of hope and, wanting to aspire to something. So Mercury leaves these dark waters of Scorpio for the sunshine, literally, of Sagittarius. And that's going to happen literally in the pre-dawn hours of Wednesday, October 29th. And when I say pre-dawn, I am always talking Pacific time, if that's helpful to you. Now, for those of you who you're not quite ready to let go of Mercury and Scorpio, right? Well, good news. You don't have to completely, because when Mercury retrogrades, which is going to happen on November 9th, it's going to be sitting at 6 Sagittarius. And slowly it's going to begin to backtrack. And it will re-enter Scorpio, moving backwards or moving retrograde, on November 18th. Now, it's going to go back as far as 20 Scorpio. So there again, if you're looking at your chart, if you have planets in the latter part of Scorpio, and you're going, ooh, how's Mercury going to kind of trip on those? What kinds of insights is it going to provide? Or where is this going on for me? Then look in your chart and see where you have those last degrees of Scorpio. The first degrees of Sag and the last degrees of Scorpio is where that retrograde is going to take place. So if you want to check that out, go ahead and check it out. But then on November 29th is when Mercury is going to move into direct motion again. So what does it do? Then it slowly starts heading back towards Sagittarius. And by the way, it's going to be there by the 11th of December. And it's going to stay there through the 1st of January, 2026. And when I saw that, that just felt so hopeful to me. It just felt like a really nice omen. Because here again, Sagittarius is hope. it's wanting for things to be better. It's just there again, how do you be, I don't know a better word for hope, just the way it makes you feel. And I thought, I love that fact. I love the retrogrades too. I'm not one of those people that dreads those, because as I've told you before, I always find something that's lost when Mercury is retrograde. It's like it truly does help me see in a different way. So something that I misplaced, something that, I put it somewhere safe and then I couldn't find it, or maybe it's just something that dropped. Maybe it dropped behind a piece of furniture or something. Well, then during a Mercury retrograde, I'm going to find that thing. That's what almost always happens. So Mercury allows us to see something different when it's retrograde. But when it comes out of that retrograde and goes back into Sagittarius, I just think that's a very hopeful sign for the holidays this year. And I love the fact that it takes us through the 1st of January. I mean, it's just great. I love that. And then, of course, it goes into Capricorn. That's the sign of work, being dedicated. So I don't know, maybe that means that even those of us who don't do New Year's resolutions, maybe we will be doing that on January with Mercury, moving into Capricorn on the 1st of January. But in any case, I think that's kind of the outlook of what's going on. So let's talk now more specifically about what's going on. But also think about it, Mercury's basically doing a split transit through Scorpio, 2 different pieces, and also doing a split transit through Sagittarius. And that happens often if a planet is retrograde. So as we look at Sagittarius, and here again, if you are a sun sign Sagittarius, or you've got other planets, start thinking in terms of this. Sagittarius is mutable fire. Every sign has it belongs to 2 different categories at least. It belongs to a modality, which is the cardinal and the fixed and the mutable. It also belongs to an element. So the mutable signs are the ones that are the most flexible, the most versatile, and it's because they occur as the 3rd sign in a season. So just as fall gives way to winter, or winter gives way to spring, what happens is that's where you have, those days where, it's really warm and then it's really cold. So all those mutable signs, which of course includes, Pisces and Virgo, and Gemini, they all have that dual side, that mutable side that is very versatile. And then, in fact, I'm going to talk about this for a couple of minutes. That's one characteristic of all of the mutable signs. There again, this Gemini twins, the Pisces fish, and the Virgo, is that they've got 2 sides. It's as if they really can stand in 2 different seasons, or they can stand in 2 different ways. There's something going on with them. And what you also see with that duality is almost always there's a sense of it being half divine and half mortal. And it's also like in this case with Sagittarius, what the symbol is for Sagittarius? It's the centaur, half man, half horse. And with the Gemini twins, you see the same thing. These 2 pieces of the same side, or the 2 fishes in Pisces, or the Virgo, who just dances between that idea of privacy and doing things on her own, or being integrated into the world. And even with Pisces, what you see too is altered states of consciousness. And are they induced by meditation or spiritual disciplines, or is it drugs and alcohol? So we're not going to talk about all those, but just remember dualism. That double kind of energy is a key characteristic of all the mutable signs trying to live in 2 different worlds, and that's certainly Sagittarius. Now, the fire side is inspirational. The fire side is aligned with the spirit. So here again, when we talk about the air signs and they're all communication and it's mental, or the earth signs are physical, well, the fire element is about literally the spiritual side, or the spirit of ourselves. Let's put it that way. So when we talk about any of the fire signs, Leo, Aries, and Sagittarius, we're talking about the need to be inspired. And this is the catchphrase I always use with fire. It wants to inspire and it wants to be inspired. And when you look at the derivation of the word inspiration, it's literally to breathe in. So to be filled with the Spirit is what we're talking about when we're talking about fire. And there again, with Sag in particular, it's about hopefulness. So some of the archetypes for Sagittarius, the gypsy, in a sense of fun-loving, dancing, just that idea, I want to travel, I want to move around, I want to have a lot of experiences. So the gypsy, the traveler, certainly Sagittarius is aligned with the student and the teacher, and the philosopher and the storyteller. Now, there's others as well, but let at least one or two of these just kind of hang there for you. This is who Sag is, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how that comes about. But in the tarot, and I'd like to give you all these associations, Sagittarius is associated with the card Temperance, which is the number 14 card. Now, in some decks that I have, I'll see this one listed as the Art card, A-R-T, or the Alchemy card. And so I want you to think about this. This is not the Justice card. However, it has characteristics that seem similar because it's characteristics of moderation and balance, being able to adjust to two worlds or two elements. And in fact, oftentimes when you see the Temperance card, it's a picture of a person with one foot on the ground and the other one in water. They're like at a seashore, or they're at a lake or a river, and they've got one foot in both of those two places. So oftentimes this card is about pulling extremes or differences together for some kind of symmetry. It's about, so there again, it's about moderation, but it's also about being able to pull those extremes together. So once again, not the Justice card, but it feels a little bit like when you get into those characteristics of balance. You'll see that in Temperance with Sagittarius. And there again, because of its duality. Now, as we said, it's ruled by the planet Jupiter. Jupiter's the biggest planet in our solar system outside of the sun. So it's the one we associate with luck and benefit and expansion and abundance and bigger growth. So in fact, I'm going to throw out some words, and these are ideas and concepts that we do associate with Sagittarius as a demonstration of the characteristics of Jupiter. So those words are expansion and growth. Insatiable curiosity. Now here again, some of these may sound like Gemini. Now Gemini is the opposite side of Sagittarius. But as you know, when we have those polarities, signs that are completely opposite each other, they're not really opposite. They're opposing on the astrological wheel, the zodiac wheel, but they often have lots of things in common. And I think this is particularly true with Gemini and Sagittarius. So that insatiable curiosity is something you're going to see in both. But with Sagittarius, what you see, and obviously there's differences, they're always the investigator, the seeker. In fact, that's kind of, an AKA, so to speak, because it's Sagittarius, AKA the seeker of truth. We often hear that or see that. It's the energy of questing and learning and teaching. It's associated with higher education and abundance and generosity. But there again, if you flip it a little too far, then it's associated with excess or overdoing something. It's associated with wisdom and principles, philosophy, social involvement, law, ethics, belief systems, mythology, philosophy, spirituality, which is personal, and then religion, which is a more formalized, structured, way of spirit, where people have agreed upon rules. It's certainly the storyteller, but there again, I see Gemini as a storyteller too. But Jupiter and Sagittarius together, that energy is definitely storytelling, including theater, acting out the stories. And of course, travel and games and risk taking, they're the gamblers of the zodiac. It's associated with luck. Now, I know that's a lot of stuff, but I want to delve a little bit deeper into some of this, but also to just give you some of those words that you can always associate with Sagittarius. So it is the seeker. Sagittarius is the one that gathers bits and pieces of information. And how do they do that? Sometimes they do it through travel, but they'll do it through taking classes. They do it by gathering experiences, having as many experiences as they can, meeting lots of people from different cultures. This is the one sign, I'm not going to say they're fearless, but they're not out there going, ooh, that feels foreign, that feels weird, that feels out of my comfort zone. No, that's exactly why they want it. They want to feel what that is like. They want to experience something different than what they already know. Now, here again, think about the centaur. And if you go into the mythology of Sagittarius, that's it, the centaur, traveling all over, gathering information, becoming, the scientist and the teacher and also the healer. Gathering all those herbs, figuring stuff out, how does this fit together? Which also brings us to a very important aspect of Sagittarius. They're one of the signs that can really see the big picture. They are a weaver of patterns. They make meaning out of the data. You know how when, this used to be, popular terms and people still talk about it, junk in, junk out, whatever. If you have, whatever you feed to the computer, then it is just going to simply take that information and spit it back out. There's a big difference between data or isolated facts and it really being information, usable information. And that's one of the things I love about Sagittarius is it doesn't just have these collections and collections and collections of information. It has the ability to categorize that information and to string it together. Sometimes I see it almost like a necklace or a bracelet or something. You give it a whole bunch of beads, it's going to start looking at them. Are they big? Are they small? What color are they? What's their texture? And string them together in beautiful ways. It's about patterns, the weaver of patterns. And so Sag provides the context or the big picture, which is why it's such a good storyteller. And why it's such a good teacher is because it's a good student. And here again, I know I use the same analogy, so just bear with me. But the way I see Gemini and Sag as being different, Gemini is like the bookseller, has a bookstore and here's all these millions of books, all this information. They love experiences too. But a Gemini person, if they were truly being Gemini, they might just have all the books just lined up on the shelves, Sag is going to make sure they're categorized. Even if the categorization is here's all the red ones and here's all the blue ones, Sag is going to put them by author or put them by, title or categorize them in some way because Sag wants to know how the information fits together. So that's how they become the philosopher. They string all the, they have all those experiences, everything that happens through travel, whether it's through really traveling or traveling in their mind or reading or experiencing, and then they figure out what it all means. Now, and they might change their mind too. That's the mutable energy. It's very likely that they could change their minds, but they're looking for what the patterns are. So here's a few other things to think about, just, on a real basic level about Mercury in Sag. It's restless, so if you find somebody jumping from topic to topic, or you find somebody just in general being very restless, that Mercury, it wants to move. See, it wants to be in motion. Gotta be in motion, gotta be moving. It's restless. And part of it is this need to gather all this information, but also the idea of freedom. And, I was thinking about this and I don't I haven't come to any conclusion or any succinct way to really distinguish, like, what's the difference, though, between Sag and Aquarius? Aquarius certainly wants independence. You know, Aquarius is always doing the dance between I want to belong and I want to rebel. I want to do it on my own. I have this issue with belonging to a group. Sagittarius, I feel like it's a different thing. It's not so much about belonging to a group or wanting not to be in the group. Sag just says, I want freedom. Don't fence me in. No rules. You know, I just need to get up and run because once again, it's a centaur. Think about a horse. I just want to get up and run. Why does a horse run? Now, certainly, horses run sometimes, you know, if they're trying to flee, you know, a predator or something like that. But horses like to run. They love the exhilaration of running. And so, you know, that's what it's about. You know, it's like, well, where are you going, Sag? I don't know. I just need to experience something. So once again, in our relationships, now here, Venus is not here. I want you to know that. And often when Venus is in Sagittarius is what we really notice in relationships. People are like, don't fence me in. I just gotta, I need some freedom here. And you're wondering, well, what the heck? You know, what's going on? But we're beginning to see that with Mercury in Sag, then we're going to see it because the sun is moving into Sag, and actually Mars is going to move into Sag. In fact, Mars is moving into Sag next week. So we're going to have even more of that kind of energy. So once again, I want to say don't take it personally because Sag does deal with issues of I don't want to be trapped, you know, and issues of boundaries. Boundaries are great, but they just don't want, you know, they want boundaries as long as they've made the boundaries. They don't want your boundaries, that kind of thing. Remember too that Sagittarius rules the upper legs. You know, specifically, once again, we're talking about horses here, right? And so it's the thighs. They want to move. I want to go from one place to another. I want to figure out how to make myself bigger and expansive. I want to expand my life. So those are some of the things that we're even going to see in communication. People talking big, you know, or expressing big ideas or dreams and that kind of thing. So remember too, these guys are excellent storytellers. But what do? They want the story to be really interesting. So when you think about it's not so much lying, it's embellishment, you know, because they want to use creative license to fill in the less interesting parts of the story, right? So if there's a little exaggeration or there's a little embellishment here and there, well, that's the way it is. And you know what? Just kind of expect that, maybe even more so than what you usually see. And I know for me, sometimes somebody will get so carried away and I'll go, wait. Did you say that or were you just thinking that? And that's the other thing I find a lot. People will be reporting a conversation and they report what they were going to say in their head, not what they actually said. And see, and that's probably a Sagittarian thing too. But remember, these people, sort of like Leo, another fire sign, they're theatrical. And so when we're under that kind of influence, we want things to be bright and beautiful and inspirational. So, and we may embellish just a little bit. We want something maybe to be better than it really was or better than we thought it was. We want to see the highest level of it. So, you know, just think about that in your communications. If you're in a situation where it's important to really communicate exactly or very specifically, well, then you may need to dial it back a little bit. Okay. Now, I had also said that Mercury in Sagittarius is a little bit, you know, like Scorpio, in that they don't want superficial answers. They want to get to the truth. But Scorpio tends to go down and deep into hidden places. Sagittarius goes wide, far and wide, looking for the information they want. They have a strategy of inclusion. They want to study everything and everybody. They want as many things as possible so that they can lay all those beads out or they can lay all those facts out and figure out what the pattern is. And so that's what we're doing too. If you see, like I said, if you see somebody kind of jumping around, they're going from one thing to the next, or they just seem to want more and more. That's the abundance. That's Jupiter going, I want more. More is better. Now, the truth is, Sag knows that there's a difference between quantity and quality. So kind of get into that as much as you can. Mercury and Sag is very social. It likes to party. This is a good time for Mercury to be in Sag because we're going into the holiday season, and it likes to be social. It likes to have gatherings. It likes to immerse itself in the lives of other people, especially foreign. And I've told you, I think I shared this story before, but I loved it. I was working with somebody and I was reading her chart, and I knew that she loved to travel. But I looked up in her ninth house. And by the way, everybody, your ninth house is the natural Sagittarian house. It's about higher education. It's about travel and your approach to like gathering all that information. Everything Sagittarius. Well, this person, I knew she loved to travel, but I looked and she had Taurus ruling that house. In other words, at the time that she was born, the constellation Taurus was up in that part of the sky. And so I asked her, because Taurus, by the way, that they can be real homebodies. I mean, they truly can. Unless there's something else going on in their chart, they want to stay home. They like the comfort of stability and the familiar. So I asked her, what is it exactly that you like about traveling? And she said a very Taurus thing. She said, the food. She likes to taste food from all over the world. And I just had to laugh. That was great. But in any case, and by the way, she also has Sun and Mercury in Gemini. So see, she loves to travel, she likes to, go for it. But I just thought it was so funny that it is Taurus in the ninth house, but it's the food that she likes. That's why she loves to travel. But, this is Mercury and Sagittarius. They love sharing their stories. They want to be, and they want them to be inspirational stories. They want to see the positive side of life. So when you're thinking about this Sag energy, just remember, and here again, we're talking about, if you look at your own chart and you see planets in Sagittarius or in the ninth house of your chart, they're mostly tolerant, open-minded, idealistic, cheerful, but they can be scattered and they can be restless. Also, this is a word we haven't used yet, zealous in defending their beliefs and their philosophies. Because here again, they get all this information, they take care with it, they string it along, they put it together in these books, or they put it together, ninth house is also about publishing, but they can be zealous in defending what they believe once they put all those ideas together. Here again, Mercury in Sagittarius, but they're good natured and they're willing to take a risk here and there, right? All right, so now we're going to spend some time looking at people and their quotes who have Mercury in Sagittarius. And I think I got a good kind of smattering of different kinds of people. But it's also interesting, and I know also when I give you these quotes or when I talk about these people, we're talking about a very isolated thing in their chart. And I want you to keep that in mind because this isn't everything about this person. And here again, if another astrologer was sitting here, they may go, oh, you know what, that aspect, I don't think that's Mercury in Sag. I think that's the Sun in Sag, or I think whatever. But when I choose the quotes, I try to choose something that they've said that sounds specifically to me, like the planet that we're talking about. But, it kind of goes different ways. And what I notice is that multiple of the people that I've chosen for today, they have Sun and Mercury in Sagittarius. In fact, they may even have several things in Sagittarius. So we're not going to really be able to delineate, oh, that's Sun, oh, that's Mercury. But when I think about it, it's like, okay, that's what I hear. I hear that Sagittarian coming through, and I'm kind of assuming it's Mercury, but there's a number of other things going on. And for some of these people too, I'm going to talk about some opposite energies. So there's other motivations. This is fun astrology, putting all these things together and trying to figure out how the pieces all fit, right? So Don't get stuck on one particular thing in a person's chart. But the first one is Carolyn Mace. Now, many of you probably know her. She's a mystic, an author, a speaker, and a guide, and has been very, very popular, at least in the past. I don't know if she still is, but she has written, I don't even know how many books, at least 10, maybe 20, all kinds of things that are metaphysical. She has Sun and Mercury in Sag. Now, here's one thing too, though. Her Mercury's retrograde. And so there again, you might see something a little bit different when Mercury's retrograde, somebody who goes deeper or somebody who goes a slightly different direction or comes up with things that other people would not. But one thing she said that I thought was an interesting quote is, it makes no sense to seek to become intuitively conscious, then work to keep that consciousness from upsetting our lives. Now, I like that because I thought that also sounded like retrograde. The reason we ferret out all this information is so we can make a different decision, so we can revise it and correct it and reanalyze it. So it makes no sense to come up with this information if you're going to keep it from upsetting your life. It's going to upset your life. Now, of course, she wrote so much. There are just so many things, quotes that we could have used, but that one is the one that spoke to me. Now, Steven Spielberg, the director, he has Sun and Mercury in Sagittarius, along with the South Node. Now, that's interesting to me because I see the South Node as something we're trying to move away from in this particular life. So, that's always interesting when somebody has, like, here again, their Sun, their ego, and their Mercury sitting next to something that in some ways I think they want to turn around, or they want to explore that energy differently. Now, that also means that Sun and Mercury are opposite the North Node in Gemini. So here again, maybe this is a situation where he wants to be a little bit looser in his interpretations. Maybe he can't, if you think about it from a past life, maybe he did come in with some really preset ideas about the way life is. And so one of the things that he is doing in his lifetime is exploring that and looking at that and trying to break patterns that he came in with. I don't know. I'm throwing it out. But here's a couple quotes by Steven Spielberg. Through careful manipulation and good storytelling, you can get everybody to clap at the same time, to hopefully laugh at the same time, and to be afraid at the same time. But you can't get everybody to interpret the result in the same way. And that's thrilling to know that everybody will see it differently. He also said, every time I go to a movie, it's magic, no matter what the movie's about. Now, that sounds like Sagittarius, whether it's the Sun or it's Mercury. It's, just about, he loves it. I want to dive into it. It doesn't matter what it is. It's going to be magic for me. Now, truthfully, he has so many quotes, just, over and over. I had a hard time choosing because so many of his just sound so Sagittarian to me. Okay, but that's one. So, you want to go investigate any of these people, that might be a good idea. Okay, Bette Midler. She has Sun and Mercury in Sag. Once again, that combination. But now in her chart, Mercury is opposing Uranus in Gemini. And remember, Uranus is how we break the rules. It's how we break through limitations. Now, her Mercury is also sextile to Jupiter. Remember, Jupiter's the ruler. So that's important. It's sextile Jupiter in Libra, which means her Mercury is getting a lot of support from Jupiter, but it's in opposition to Uranus and Gemini. And I could really hear that in some of the things that she says. Specifically, she said, I never know how much of what I say is true. Now, that just struck me as speaking to that opposition. But she also said, find your light. They can't love you if they can't see you. Very Sagittarian. Now, this one could be a little controversial, but I love it. And I don't think I've ever used it in the Power of Peak because it might be a little controversial. But she said, I made a pact with myself a long time ago. Never watch anything stupider than you. It's helped me a lot. And like I said, I think it's kind of, it's controversial. I think that's the Uranus opposition, but I love the sentiment. If you want to get smarter, if you want to be more hopeful, if you want to be like something, you have to focus your energies on those people, on those ideas. You have to, that's how you're going to get smarter. That's how you're going to get more hopeful. That's how you're going to get more tolerant, by focusing on people who do something really well. Now, she also said, through books and photographs, I saw a world that was not my own. And I realized that there was another world. That's why I'm concerned about education, because it helps our children see other worlds. And once again, very Sagittarian, because she's talking about being able to see something different, even though, she might have been limited in terms of where she was living as a child, what was going on. But through books, she could travel. But also she uses the word education, which is very much of a Sagittarian word, being interested in education, opening up the avenues for other people. Okay, Woody Allen is, the director, writer, actor. He has Sun, Mercury, and Jupiter all in Sagittarius, and they're conjunct. That means they are very tightly together. I mean, they were definitely operating in a sense as a unit, Sun, Mercury, Jupiter, at the time that he was born. But they were also all square Saturn. Saturn is that planet of authority and discipline. And they all were opposing Chiron in Gemini. So this is where you begin to see that the patterns are all a little bit different, and the way somebody acts it out. And especially with Woody Allen, the square to Saturn. You don't get to tell me what to do. I'm going to be my own authority here. So here are a couple of quotes by him. What if nothing exists and we're all in somebody else's dream? Don't you love that? He said, tradition is the illusion of permanence. And see there again, that kind of Henri, you see that square to Saturn. Tradition is the illusion of permanence. He sidelined, it's not important or it doesn't mean anything. He also said, we are the sum total of all of our choices. That to me is very Sagittarius. Okay. I see we are getting close to time and there's still a few more people. Howard Hughes, that a very eccentric aerospace engineer businessman, he had Mercury, Venus, and Moon in Sagittarius, and Mercury's opposite Pluto. That's a really strong one. And in fact, I did want to spend a little more time, and we're not going to be able to, but Mercury opposite Pluto is associated with being a powerful communicator, but it tends to come out as arrogance or being incredibly subjective and not being objective, an attachment to your ideas. Your ego is your ideas, being very stubborn and opinionated, maybe secretive. But, he said, if you know who he is, one thing I love is he said, passion will make you crazy, but is there any other way to live? But he said, I am willing to go beyond all limitations. I intend to be the greatest golfer in the world, the finest film producer in Hollywood, the greatest pilot in the world, and the richest man in the world. And here again, there are so many quotes I could have come up with him that you just hear that bigger than life Sagittarius, but it's being opposed by Pluto, the transformer. So boy, we could spend shows on that particular chart, I'm sure. Okay, Ted Turner, there again, in a sense, bigger than life in terms of, who he is. He started CNN. He was very influential in cable and all of kind of those big changes with television, etc. There again, he's just got a resume that's incredible. But he has Mercury in Sagittarius, trine Saturn in Aries. So there again, kind of that Aries ego, but just saying, I can do this. I know how to do this. And just putting himself, what do they say? Putting your money where your mouth is, that kind of thing. But it was square Neptune in Virgo. And so the other thing that you find is that he gave away, literally, the money he gave away is in the billions. Lots and lots of money he gave away. And I think it's even in his will that when he dies, all that money or most of it goes to charity. So it's an interesting combination of, you know, the stuff that he has said. But he also said to succeed, you have to be innovative. And if only I had a little humility, I'd be perfect. So there again, you see that bigger than life kind of thing. Now, we're not going to be able to do much of these, but I also have some quotes by Robert F. Kennedy. Now, I'm talking about the father, the one that was born in 1925, the brother of the president. That's who I'm talking about, just so there won't be any confusion. He has so many incredible quotes that really reflect Mercury in Sagittarius trine Neptune in Leo and trine Chiron. He had a grand trine in fire. So, you know, just there again, over the top, like, and I have so many quotes, we're not going to be able to get to them, but he said, the purpose of life is to contribute in some way to making things better. And some of these we may actually use next week because there's just so many good quotes that he had that I kind of hate to let those go, but we are. All right, so we are moving on. We are closing the show out. Heads up for next week. Mars enters Sagittarius. Venus changes signs, goes into Scorpio. Uranus changes signs because it's going to retrograde back into Taurus. Mercury begins its retrograde. And by the way, we have a full moon. So it's a big week. Please, you know, mark your calendars and join me next week or catch it, you know, in the archives. So thanks everybody for joining me today. Thanks to all the listeners and everybody in the chat room. Thanks to our producer, Serena. I hope that you'll stay tuned for Empowerment with Kelly Whetstone. Coming up next on 12radio.com and also on her YouTube channel, Empowerment with Kelly Whetstone. Now, I'm going to leave you with one quote by Ted Turner, and he said, you should set your goals beyond your reach so that you will always have something to live for. This is CA signing out. You can find me for personal sessions on 12listen.com. Please feel free to request a scheduled call at a time that's good for you. You have been listening to Everyday Astrology with CA Brooks on 12 Radio and streaming on YouTube, where we are changing the way we listen to the world.